Welcome to the Iyun Podcast, an in-depth look at Haredi society, Israel, and the Jewish people. I am your host, Ari Koretsky, and I invite you to join us as we confront the challenges, joys, and possibilities of Torah-centered living in an evolving world. The Iyun Podcast, Think Again. As a Torah-oriented podcast, we've explored many topics relating to charedim in the army and so forth. But perhaps the elephant in the room is that we have not yet really addressed certain major halachic and hashkafic topics as sourced directly in Chazal, namely questions of milchemes mitzvah, the argument of Torah magneh, and others. It was not easy to find the right Torah personality, the right Talmud Chacham to address these questions. Many people are reticent to speak on the record about this issue, even when it's simply talking and learning, so to speak. Others are not fluent in the ins and outs of this particular topic. In addition, we wanted someone specifically from within Haredi precincts to enhance the credibility and to dispel the idea that we're treating this sugya in some sort of propagandistic fashion. Thankfully, we identified a wonderful Talmud Chacham, Rabbi Yitzchak Lifshitz, who is a Rav with his own community, a Maggid Shir, many places, a Rosh Kollel. And he's also written somewhat widely about the subjects I've referenced above. We're very excited to present this chavrusa, so to speak, this Shir Klali, talking and learning on some vital Torah subjects with Rabbi Yitzchak Lifshitz. We are here with Rabbi Yitzchak Lifshitz, and we are going to be discussing a topic that I've wanted to approach and dissect for quite some time. We've done an extensive series on charedim and the army. Anyone who's been following this podcast is more than well aware of that fact. But one angle that we haven't yet addressed, and that is so vital if we are, in fact, people who are committed to Torah, to sources, to halacha, to the mechanisms that govern our lives in every other conceivable area. How do some of those issues play out with respect to this question? And specifically, there are a number of questions that I'm hoping to discuss today that we, again, have not yet addressed, including what the framework, the geder of a milchemes mitzvah is, and how does that or does that not apply to our current situation? What is the idea of people being exempted through Shevet Levi? What is the idea of the Torah protecting, Torah magneh, and so forth, the Torah protecting those who study? And these are often cited as reasons that many people do not participate in the army. Each one of these aforementioned subtopics in its own way, and we want to address them from a halachic perspective, from a in-depth perspective, and what is the Torah, what is Chazal, what do the Makoros, the sources, actually say about these specific sugyas, these specific issues. And so I'm joined by an eminently qualified, wonderful Talmud Chacham, Rabbi Lifshitz. And Rabbi Lifshitz, tell us a little bit about your own background, where you're from, and then we'll segue into how you got involved in learning about these particular topics and writing and speaking about them. But tell us first, where are you from?
Well, I went to Hebron Yeshiva. Since then, I mainly taught. I was for a very short time in the Kollel, and then I taught in the American Yeshiva, and then Israeli Yeshiva. But
you're from Jerusalem? You're from Israel?
I was born in Switzerland.
Born in Switzerland?
Yeah, but we came to Israel when I was 6, so it's like growing up here. My main language is not English. It was French. My English is better than my French now. But anyway, I went to Yeshiva Ktana, Yeshiva Gdela. I went to Hebron. That's my background.
And did you grow up in a sort of a Haredi household? A very, what would we call it?
It was Haredi house. Although my father was also a psychologist, so he was. He never encouraged us to get academic, studies, but I did.
Where did you go for that?
And I also teach in a college, Jewish philosophy.
And so you did your own...
Shalem. I did my own, right.
Shalem College.
I did it later, after yeshiva. I went.
Wonderful. What drew you to try to get an academic degree?
I did something interesting. That's probably connected to this topic. I wrote on Maharam of Rothenburg. Maharam Rothenburg was maybe the biggest. We shouldn't grade it, but he was the most decisive posek from the Rishonim. The Shulchan Aruch, everything it has to do with the Ilchos Kehila is based on Maharam of Rothenburg, and so I wanted to write about what is called political philosophy, Jewish political philosophy. But my decision was that instead of studying Moreh Nevuchim, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, etc., they wrote philosophy, but as poskim, they didn't care much. I should be careful, but there were less. Their halacha came from the Gemara.
They were kind of two separate domains.
Right,
it wasn't as much interplay.
So, and I think that thinking Jewish is thinking halachic. And if I really want to get the philosophy, I want to start from halacha and then to come up with what could have been or what should have been their philosophy based on their halacha. So I took his halacha and made from that a political theory, and that helped me to study this subject as well.
Maharam Rothenberg has become very interesting sort of touch point because of his stance on being a hostage himself and the whole hostage exchange.
It's a topic by itself.
Yes, of course. Not intending to unpack it, just pointing out that it's been spoken about and referenced often in the last year and a half.
It is though. The truth is, it is very important. Marshall says that they say, he is not certain, but they say that he always insisted that it will not be redeemed.
Right.
Though the son, the rosh was his Talmud, and he was working very hard on getting the ransom to redeem him, and he wasn't successful, and he had to escape Germany, he and his children, first to Provence and then to Spain. And his son tells this whole biography of his father, and he doesn't mention a word about his refusal. We assumed it never happened.
Right.
The
whole thing might be
he was captured.
But whether he insisted on this.
The Marshall says, but why did he refuse? He should have not refused. So, Professor Simcha Emanuel claims that it was someone else, and the story was alluded to Maharam, but it was never him. There's a story with Ramban's disciple, but anyway.
A total sidebar. I was just curious since you mentioned Maharam.
But it's very, very important because Maharam points out that the halachas of kahal, of kehila, of the political halachas, communal, and it's greater than communal, depend on two things, or they start from the Gemara, but more than the Gemara, the minhagim are very, very important, and the importance of the survival of Am Yisrael is greater than the nitty-gritty halachas, and that has to do with Yeshiva Bachim going to the army. It's what I try to do. I wrote an article in Tzorchiyun about it, and I was really afraid to write it because I knew that I'll get it from both sides. And it wasn't that bad, but it wasn't bad at all. But my perspective was that it's way more important to understand hashkafa than halacha. So it's important to understand what halacha demands, but it's also important to understand its limits. There are those who claim that since Am Yisrael never had a state, there are no halachas of a state.
No precedents.
No precedents. I disagree with that. I think that we should derive from the halachas of community, we should derive conclusions about the Jewish state as well. But it's not automatic. We have to use our judgment as well. And this political judgment is essentially important.
Yeah. I mean, this is, of course, what Rav Goren attempted to do, and others worked hard on these kinds of issues, right?
Yes.
But it's interesting at the same time, when you're talking about the Maharam and others, you're saying that you do believe in starting from the halacha and extracting the philosophy or the hashkafa, if you will, from the halacha. So that does seem to be your point of departure, at least.
Yeah, of course. We are Jewish people. We have to start from halacha, and we have to start from the Gemara always. But I want to start from the end. There is, in Israel, every normal country, democratic country, there is a committee that makes a decision about medicine, about how much we should. In the States, I guess it's very different because until Obamacare, it wasn't free. But in Israel, any
socialized medicine.
So the question is, how much does the state have to help? Have to subsidize medicine? And it's a life and death question. There is no, they always say, in Judaism, life is more important than everything, which is true. But if you spend all your budget on medicine, there will be nothing left for security, for the police, for anything else. You have to run
garbage collection.
Right. I mean, so maybe medicine is more important than garbage collection, but at the end, it's also medical. I mean, it has medical ramifications. So it's so there is a committee that sits and makes this decision, and it has doctors and rabbis in Israel. It's very interesting the way it works, and I'm bringing it as an example because at the end of the day, the question is not only what should be done, but how you judge it and how you calculate it with everything else. That's the difference between a state and your personal, home. When you make a decision on what you want to spend, even there we make our calculations. It's an economic question. It's not only halachic. Well, the halacha depends a lot on economic here. So there are two sugyas in stake, really. I mean, you mentioned also Shevet Levi, which is nice, but there are two sugyas. Number one is what you mentioned before, milchemes mitzvah. We hear a lot from the more Zioni yeshivas or Zioni rabbis that claim, well, there is milchemes mitzvah here. And because there is a milchemes mitzvah, we must do, even a chosen has to go to chosen, etc. Now, what is the mistake here? Then I claim that when you bring sources, you have to put them into perspective. What's a mistake? And I insist that it's a mistake. The mistake is that the Torah doesn't emphasize, the story of milchemes mitzvah, we have to understand this is the exception. The invention of the Torah is the regulations of milchemes reshus, not milchemes mitzvah.
So say a little bit more about that. Let's start a step back. And where do we learn at all in the Torah about the laws of milchama, and where does that come through the Gemara and through the Rambam, etc.? And then place this into context.
So in Sheftim and in Sefer Dvarim, right? In Sheftim and Kiseitza, the Torah talks about when you go to a war, there are halachos of Eishes Efaser, but more than that, you have to be very careful when you never to make a total siege. When a person is too afraid, when he married, he's just a chosen, and there are regulations about how much you can force people to fight for you. That means you are a king, you have a lot of power, and the Torah qualifies your power as a king. And as Chazal explained in the Gemara, that it's the qualification is not only that you have to ask the Kohen Mashiach to go and to give a speech and to tell everybody, if you're afraid, or just go home, don't make everybody afraid. And as I mentioned before, and if you just got married, that's not for you. But also, when the king wants to start such a war, an unnecessary war, a war that is made for
expansionary purposes, maybe,
mainly for economic purposes. For us, it's strange. We don't think this way nowadays.
Right.
But in the past, this was
we call that colonialism now.
Right. So
but that was just the resource acquisition.
It used to be completely
right. It's the
legal.
entire history of all of
There was right. There was no ethical qualification here, but the Torah thinks that there is a problem, and if a king wants to do that, he has to ask the permission of. He has to ask for Urim V'Tumim, and he has to ask the permission of Sanhedrin. The judicial power is greater than the king, and if he gets a permission, he can start a war.
Now, this is all milchemes rishus.
This is only rishus.
Everything the Torah is talking
right.
about in Parsha Chareidim, etc., Parsha Kisetze, is milchemes rishus.
Right. So when Chazal talk about milchemes mitzvah, it means that all that we said, all the regulations, all the qualifications of a war, do not apply on milchemes mitzvah.
And how is that category incepted? In other words, where do they learn that from? Where does the idea of milchemes mitzvah come out of?
No, they just say that
it's just logic.
It's just logic, and why? Because there are two kinds of milchemes mitzvah. There is the proper milchemes mitzvah that milchama ba'amalek, and the other one is milchama with Shiva Amamim. When Yeshua conquered the land. But this is the past. We don't have Amalek now. We don't have Shiva Amamim. But we do have. There is the third option is milchemes chayva, milchemes mitzvah, which is la'atzil Yisrael miyad tzar. That means that it's a defense war just to save Am Yisrael. And
this is brought down to the Rambam.
Right, and it's brought down to Rambam as an exception of the regulations of a war. That means in those cases, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, in those cases, you don't need to ask the permission or the psak of Sanhedrin. So it's the whole idea of milchemes mitzvah. It's not that it doesn't have any applications that Gemara in Shabbos talks. There are some minor applications, but the main issue of milchemes mitzvah is to say we do not have to do. We don't have to ask Urim V'Tumim. We don't have to. But why? Because we must save Am Yisrael. And when the Gemara says afilu chasan nechedrei v'kala mechupasa, what the Gemara means is not that every chasan, every kala has to, they have to wear, a vest and take guns and kill Arabs. Nobody requests women to fight. It means that if necessary, at the end of if there aren't any soldiers, even the chassan has to fight. Even the kala has to fight. If when
they would be the last line
in Ghetto Varsha. Women also fought. There is it's a last line. It's not that chassan has an obligation to fight. It's a mistake. It's a misunderstanding of the whole thing. It's the idea of milchemes mitzvah is that reality requests that you'll do something, and when reality requests, when it's pikuach nefesh, of course, you don't ask psak halacha. If God forbid, a member of your family needs to go to the hospital, you just go to the hospital. You don't ask for a heter. You just do it. The Gemara in Yerushalayim says that if a rabbi is asked a shaila about pikuach nefesh, he's sheifach damim. Why didn't he teach his community not to ask questions about that? And I feel the same thing here. It's not a halachic question. When there is a war, of course, you have to fight. But in a modern state, it's much more complicated. You can't ask a person, okay, there's a war, take a gun and fight. You have to prepare, you have to study, you have to learn how to be a soldier. And the army needs all kinds of soldiers. It's very, very complicated. So, of course, the answer to the question, or the application of the idea of milchemes mitzvah, milchemes chayva, whatever you want to call it, is much more complicated than it used to be in the past, that they ask people to go with a sword and do whatever they can. Because today you have to learn more. In the past also they had to learn, but that's something else.
Right. So basically what I'm hearing you say is that milchemes mitzvah, yes, it's self-evident that we are engaged in some sort of a milchemes mitzvah, milchemes chayva, whatever you want to call it, and that it would be almost a matter of pure logic and clear halachic precedent that does demand every able-bodied person, if needed, to go and fight. The question becomes, what does it mean if they're needed? And how do you prepare people for that? And how does the society as a whole calculate and consider who should go and who shouldn't go if not every single person is going to go, right? Which is the case. Some people have to, work in factories still, or keep the economy going, or
work on computers.
And this is another type of soldier, of course, and so forth. And therefore, with charedim, who have not necessarily been prepared for these kinds of tasks, so it's certainly not the case that immediately they should be demanded to just go to the front lines, and that's that. Although, I guess that's probably not what's being asked, right? I think for the most part, people are saying, okay, get them into the process to begin learning how to do these things.
Exactly.
Which, of course, you could argue, well, by the time they learn how to do it, we might not anyway more be in a milchemes chayva anymore. To which people could say, well, then if you only say that, then the next time we are in that case, you'll never have the solution, because it'll never be a time that they'll never be ready, and therefore you have to start even when it's not. They can't actually help, so they're ready for when eventually they could help when they're needed again. So it's tricky.
I want to add something. I think it's important. And I mentioned before, in Israel, we call it salat trufot, the basket of medicine, meaning this committee that decides how much we're going to spend on which medicine. And the same thing goes about yeshiv bachim going to the army. A state, unlike if it's, in your private home, when you have to go and help your wife to go to the hospital, your children, your grandmother, whatever it is, you just go. But when we talk about a state, it's the same thing as I mentioned, that we can spend all the money that we have for every sort of medication that exists. Why? By the way, it will, if we will, let's say Israel was, I hope will become again a rich country. We can spend much more in this basket. But if we are spending anything that is medical companies are requesting, of course, this is going to raise their price. So there is a give and take here. And the same thing about learning Torah. A state can decide, even a non-religious state can decide, we don't want everybody to fight. We can afford having, let's say, 80% fighting and the rest doing art. And we want, of course, that the Jewish state will direct many people to learn Torah. This is something that a modern state can stomach. We can afford that not everybody will fight, even in such horrible cases, situations as we are now. You can't have everybody fighting in a war. And if you will, it's the same thing with the medicines. If you'll do everything that the army, if you'll ask the army, they'll say the more the better. We need everybody. Of course they want everybody. And the more you give the army, the more they will demand. But if you sit and you manage, if you are in the government, or if you are in a committee that decides for the government, you have to take into account other things besides security. So you can't ask people of security how many. It's not an objective question, how many soldiers we need. Because the more soldiers you have, we can conquer Yemen, we can conquer all the Arab states around us. We can do many things when we have many, many, many soldiers. We have to do much less with more sophistication, with less soldiers. So we have to tell the army how many soldiers we're willing to give them, and how many soldiers we think that for a Jewish state should sit in the Kollel, should sit in yeshivas.
Right. Although the problem, of course, with that logic is that this is exactly the logic that was employed before October 7th, with the so-called conceptia that we need a smaller and smarter army. And ultimately, it seems, quote unquote, objectively, that they did need a larger army. So the army, at least to some degree, would be deemed correct. And it seems like the government got it wrong in that case, right?
And the fear is that the Haredi community is growing exponentially. And because of that, we know that we are reaching soon the 20%, and it will be 30, it will be 40. This is something that the state can't afford. So I'm saying those things should be discussed, should be To say we need everybody needs to go in milchemes mitzvah, this is wrong. This is not a calculation of a modern state. Modern state should think of many uses or many needs, and the needs are not only security, but at the same time there is a problem in Israel. It's not that the whole country is divided by, let's say, 80% of people that are in the army, and there are 20% intellectuals that are sitting and studying. When you talk about the Chareidim community, we are not all intellectuals. I mean, I can say, unfortunately, I don't think that it's good that everybody is an intellectual. We need from people that are doctors, we need from people that are teachers, we need from people that are working. I mean, that's important for the frum community, not only for the states, but of course that it's very important for the state as well. So I'll come back to it. I want to go now to the calculation from the frum side. Why is it wrong that everybody is sitting and learning? And there is a very interesting Chazon Ish. One of the sources that people base the Ptor, the exemption from the army, is Torah, magneh u'matzlah. The Gemara in Bava Basra says that if you sit and learn, you are exempt from some sorts of taxes, especially security tax. And the reason is that the Torah is Rabbanan leitzrichin atiruta, that whoever learns Torah, it doesn't need he's secure. God secures him. He doesn't need people to fight for him. Chazon Ish says this is a misunderstanding of what the Gemara says. And he asked the following question. Let's say 50% of the people are sitting and learning. We have a city, right? The Gemara talks about a city. We have a city. We have 50% that are sitting and learning, and 50% that are working. Okay, they'll pay taxes. Is that fair to ask them to give 50? The whole burden of tax will fall on 50%. Let's say we understand. Yeah, we are asking them to pay 50%. What if it will be one person who is not sitting and learning, and all the rest? Will you say, "Anachnu somchim al hanes," right? And because of that, there is no security problem? He said it's wrong. If everybody is sitting and learning, of course that they'll have to fight and they'll have to pay taxes, all of them. And if there is one, of course we'll not ask one person to pay the taxes of the whole city. And he claims the following. He says that the whole idea of Rabbanan leitzrichin etirusa, the idea is that it's just a way to help learn the Torah, that they will not need to. It's difficult for them anyway, and the financial burden. They're sitting and learning. They're not working, so we want to help them. And he said security is a sort of a tax that it makes sense to exempt them. We don't exempt yeshivachim from all taxes, but security, because that there is an idea, the Torah magneh, it's not completely true. I mean, it's always true, but it's not. We can't rely on that. But there is some logic about it. It is from a ashkafa point of view that we know that the more we learn Torah, the more that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is protecting us. So because of that, we exempt the Torah. But he says we judge it from a perspective of tzedakah. And in tzedakah, you can ask 10%. From tzaddikim, you can ask 20% to pay, but never more. So you can't ask people to spend more than 20% of their income for, to give tzedakah. So this is tzedakah. To exempt yeshiva bachim from paying taxes, this is the way we give tzedakah to yeshiva bachim. So it's really only talking about taxes. It's not talking about learning Torah and not going to the army.
Well, I mean, I think just
it's a security tax.
On its face, right? If we would say that Torah protects, I mean, people would ask, well, how could October 7th even happen? There's more people learning
of course.
in history. And people people go to bomb shelters and people are still afraid, even if they're full-time learners, right? So it can't be that Torah protecting is some complete and absolute promise that means that nobody has anything to worry about, whether it's them or the rest of the country, right?
I must say one thing. There was a sociologist in Bar Ilan, Menachem Friedman, Professor Menachem Friedman. He claimed what is called a society of learners, Chevrat Lomdim. He invented this term, Chevrat Lomdim. He said, and he and his students always tell us that there were never as many Loim the Torah as now. Now, in real numbers, it may be true. But in percentage, I'm not so sure. There is a sefer, Reb Nosson Neta Hanover. Nosson Neta Hanover was a Talmid Chacham, lived through in the 17th century in Poland, throughout the time of the Chmielnicki, massacres, the pogroms, which was horrific.
Yeah.
And the stories that he says, they might be, I'm sure they are exaggerated, but when you see what the Arabs did in Gaza, the area, I don't know what's an exaggeration, but anyway, it was horrific. And so he tells the whole story. It's called Even Metzula. You can find it in the internet. It's the whole book. I think it's a must. I'm not asking everybody to read, at least not the beginning of the book, because I'm saying you can't sleep it. Yeah, but the end of the book is really fascinating, and he tells a story with, he longs Poland before the war. So it's not the Holocaust. It's before that Holocaust of Tachvetat, the 17th century. And he claims that a third of the Jewish community were sitting and learning. A third. Now, it's not the same as sitting and learning now, but the whole community, it might have been an exaggeration. But how much is it exaggerated? He tells the story of the Polish community. They were well-to-do, they were able to afford it, but he says the whole community was either helping by giving money or by having Lem the Torah. You heard about the exactly. So it started already then, 300 years ago, and they were either hosting, having them eating with them in the house, or he says, or themselves. They were wealthy, but they were sitting and learning. So this whole story of we have now more Lem the Torah than ever. We also have so many not religious people as ever. We have, thank God, we have 20%, but it's 20% of Yeshivachim, not of the whole community. So there are 10% in Israel of Haredi people. I'm not so sure that it's still that we reached the peak of what we had in Poland. So I don't buy these stories. I'll be much more careful.
Fair enough, but nonetheless,
I'm sorry for
no. But how therefore do you, when you hear this idea of Torah magneh, when people will marshal that as a justification not to serve, what do you respond?
So my response is, do me a favor, study the sugya, and you have to understand that it's only about security tax. It's not about not fighting when someone needs you. That's all it's the foshes. You have to go and fight. So the end.
Do you believe there's an idea in the Torah that the Torah is offering some sort of protection to people, or that itself is not even?
No, it's ensign chelal nes.
Right.
You can't say that. Again, I'm not saying that because of that we should close yeshivas, chas v'sholem. I'm coming back to my first calculation. I'm saying it's a political, economic question. This is something that I teach my academic students. There is something that people don't understand about the development of the political idea. People talk about democracy. We have democracy. America is democracy. Israel, the West has democracies, which is beautiful. The New World did not only come back, it's not an invention, democracy, did not only, it does not only conclude democracies, but it invented the modern state. what is the modern state?
The nation state, yeah.
It's not only the nation state. The modern state, people don't understand. I mean, I repeat it all the time. This is a book that was put by, what's his name? John Strayer, what's his first name? From Princeton. It was in the 70s, in the 20th century. And he shows the development and the difference between it's a slow development that the state took upon itself. Before it was a democracy, all kinds of things that in the past were not the responsibility of the state. Who took care of the sick people in the Middle Ages? The church.
And the welfare state, essentially.
Right. The monasteries.
Even in America, this wasn't the case until have a safety net and so forth. Until Roosevelt
I'm coming back to medication all the time, but for medicine, forget about medicine. Let's talk about education. Who thought that it's the obligation of the state to be responsible of the education of your children, of culture. All these things are a new idea. Even more than that. It's true that the Roman Empire thought that it has to pave streets and etc. And it had also a judicial system. But it was not as forceful as it is now. Nobody thought. In the Middle Ages, they had 3, 4, 5 judicial systems. The church had a system, the merchants had their own judicial system, the guilds had their system, the Jews had their own, of course, but they didn't. It was voluntary. There was it's not a service that the state gave you. Nobody thought that the king has to take upon himself. Even the treasure was privatized, meaning that that the Jewish communities had an autonomy because they had the right to collect among themselves the tax. Why was it? Because there was no treasurer ministry. So every community, Jewish or not Jewish, had to collect among themselves the tax and give it to the king. So there was some sort of some of money that had to be given, and the Jews made sure to collect it among themselves. So the idea that a modern state, not a national state, any state, American is not national. This idea of national state is, people talk against it now. But every state wants to have its own identity. And the identity is cultural, it's ethical, whatever is decided. So I can't think of a Jewish state that doesn't think that learning Torah is its identity. I tell the non-religious people, granted, we need culture. So the same as Yeshiva Bachim learning Torah, if you want the students of philosophy to be exempt from the army, I think from a Jewish point of view, it's a very important thing. Not everybody has to fight. We have to understand that if we want to secure our identity, we have to exempt people from fighting, because if you make everybody a soldier, the personality, the quality of the people, the character of the nation is changing. You make everybody's a warrior. It's not good. You want people that will think. You want people that will play music. They'll devote themselves to culture. Granted, take the culture that you believe. We demand, as from people, we demand that it will be Torah. You want something else? Fine. We can negotiate about that. That's why you have politics. But to say that because we are we are in a neighborhood where we need many soldiers. Yes, we need many soldiers. So we need to decide how many people we exempt from fighting, and how many people are necessary to fight. This is a question of calculation, of negotiation, of really serious judgment. So I'm saying again, milchemes mitzvah yes, you have to fight, but this is not that the Torah tells you, well, in milchemes mitzvah, everybody has to fight. The Torah never makes a decision like that. It's a modern state that decides you have to fight because it's necessary to be saved. You want to say, oh, we can't go to the army because Torah, magneh, mitzvah. Okay, you're exempt from security tax. But what about fighting and helping your neighbor? Is correct. You must fight when it's necessary. But again, when we manage a state, we have to think big. We have to think not only about our physical survival, but also about our spiritual survival, about our identity. And of course, about our identity as a Jewish state. So this sort of calculation is so much more important and so much more correct than just the very practical question, do I personally need to go? It's not a question about you, if you have to go and fight or not. I'm sorry, I'm talking to my...
No, I just want to, I guess...
I'll tell you a story. At my time, this is 40-something years ago. I'm not young anymore. When I was in Hebron Yeshiva, so I had two friends that went to Rabbi Yoshiv to ask if they have to go, if they have to go to the army. No, how did it, I'm ruining it. If they can go to the army. Yeah, this was can they go to the army? So Rabbi Yoshiv said, you are asking the question wrong. You have to ask if you can stay in yeshiva. You have to go to the army. But I'm telling you, you can also stay in yeshiva and sit and learn. But you can't ask, can I go to the army? You must go to the army. You have an obligation to go to the army.
Do you think that's become inverted now, meaning there's an entire section of society that question is not being asked at all? What do you think happened?
Look, I'm not a sociologist. I have my own opinions. But unfortunately, because of this very justified permission to sit and learn, and I'm saying it has to be limited. You can't have the whole community. But because of this justification to sit and learn, our community was not clever enough to decide who is fitted and who is not. So people abused it. Why should I risk my life? And there is also, we know that our community has a mechanism of control. I'm sorry to say that. This is a completely different conversation. But we want to protect ourselves as Chareidim people. So what's the most powerful machinery to protect our
social pressure,
and it's the shidduch business. If you don't go to the right seminary, you will not find a good shidduch. If you don't go to the right yeshiva, you'll not get the. So there is a huge pressure to go to these yeshivas and to design your biography in a way that you'll have a good resume, so you can read the shidduch that you'll read will be read to you will be a good shidduch. This is the key to enter to the community. So of course everybody wants to be the same. There is no idea of variety of chanech lenar al pi darko, that every person has to do what is good for him, and not only to be the mass-produced, the Haredi dogma. I mean, there are many. We have problems.
How would you address
Israel is much worse than America, but we have a problem.
How would you address the idea that the Hilumi community right now is expressing a great deal of resentment because, of course,
they're mad.
They're very, very beyond mad, and because of the percentage of soldiers that are dying from their community, which is really quite remarkable in a sense. But they would also claim that, look, we also have people that learn full-time. Why is learning Torah the exclusive province of Haredi community? We should also, if you want to exempt, why should we also not exempt And on the other angle, you see we produce people who are still Talmidei Chachamim, Sava Safra, right? It's going out with the sword, and are great Talmidei Chachamim still. Maybe you could do the same thing. Why can't the charedim do the same thing? People that are very learned and very committed to Torah, and in between the battle, they're pulling out their svarim. But why can't they do that?
It's really remarkable to see these people that I have two children that were in three children, two children and a son-in-law that were in the war now. And one of them was most of the time in Gaza. He's still going there all the time. And he observed people that are just sitting and learning in every recess. Every time that everybody rests, they open a Gemara and sit. It's remarkable. It's really. But after all, I adore them. But if you ask me at the same time, is it justified that we'll let people out of the army and sit and learn? I say yes. I think that I know this community. And there are some very good Talmidei Chachamim, but you cannot achieve the godless, that you can't have Chazon Ish or Moshe Feinstein if you don't direct your life to sitting and learning, to devote your life just for that. I'm sorry. Later on, Chazon Ish, Moshe were all dealing with the community when they were in their late 30s, 40s. But if you don't let a person to sit and learn, to devote your life just for Torah, you can't achieve that. But look, the problem is really deep. Rav Moshe was my grandmother's cousin. Her father was Rav Yaakov Kantorovich. Moshe quotes him a lot. He was his Rebbe. Rav Yaakov, he had two children in Kletsk. His first son was killed in the Holocaust, was a great Talmid Chacham. He came and tested them, and his youngest son, he said, you are not for learning. And if you would have seen him, Herzl Kantorovich, he taught him Shechita. He told him, you'll be a sheikh. This is not a time of, you can't sit and learn, you have to go to the army. This is just, you're not fitted for sitting and learning. Now, I knew Herzl. Herzl knew Shas, like in his... this not Talmid Chacham, the son of Rav Yaakov Kantorovich, can teach everybody Torah. His knowledge of Torah was just amazing. And he was sitting and learning every spare time. But Yaakov thought that he should not waste his time, the space of someone else.
Well, it's interesting. This leads to a question about another commonly invoked point about this exemption of Shevet Levi. Can you just tell us, first of all, just as the baseline, what are people talking about? Give us the sources, and then I want to...
There's an interesting Rambam. Rambam says at the end of Shemitah V'Yovel, Rambam says that the Shevet Levi is... the Torah said that we should support Shevet Levi because they devote them their time for Avodas HaMikdash, etc. And Rambam says that it's not only Shevet Levi that should be exempt from the needs of the state, but anybody who Meloi Liboy, anybody who wants to be like a Levi, we should exempt him. Now, Rambam at the end of most of the Sforim, he comes up with a Ashkafa sort of a statement. This is much more Ashkafa. You can't say, well, I decided I'm like Shevet Levi. I put it together, or I understand it the same as what I said before. Rambam foresaw the situation of a state that needs, Rambam was, I said before that I want to learn with Rambam as a posek and not Rambam as a philosopher, but was also a philosopher, we know. And there is the state of the philosopher that Rambam adopted, I believe. And Rambam thought that it's important, as I said before, that the state should have some people that sit and learn, and it's not only the V'im. And that's taken. But when you see that the whole state decides that they're Shevet Levi, there is a problem. We know that Rambam didn't like that everybody... people said also that Rambam didn't like the yeshivas. The Rambam had probably the biggest yeshiva of the time that was supported. So Rambam knew that it's not good for everybody to sit and learn. But at the same time, I think Rambam understood that it's important that the state will have some people that will be free of their materialistic needs. It should be put in this perspective.
So then Shevet Levi, you talk about this Herzl Konsterovich,
right.
Would he have been Shevet Levi? It sounds
Rav Yaakov
like the
thought
level
that
that's required for this, right?
Right, he shouldn't be. And in his Rav Yitzchak Lifshitz, he was.
So when an entire class of people,
the whole community say,
you're saying that's not possible.
And we see what's going on, we know, unfortunately. It's a big waste of time. I grew up on, my father, Alav Shalom, was always quoted to me Rav Dr. Rav Dr. used to say that our community, it says, Elef nichnasim lemikro ve'echad yoytze lo ira. So he says we sacrifice the many for the very few that become gdolim.
It's a certain perspective on yeshivas.
I told my father what we see is that we sacrifice the few for the many. It used to be, in Lithuania, in Lita, they used to handpick gdolim. They used to adore gdolim. Now you don't want to be magneh. You want to be like everybody else. It's the mediocrity that wins. That's the price for this communal, monolithic perspective that everybody has to do the same as everybody else. The philosophy is not to be unique. You're not to be unique in Torah. It's not to be unique in Yerushalayim. It's to be like it's mass produced, and this is a very, very expensive price that we're paying. So I think we should, as a community, we should do homework not only about the army, and this is true about the state as well, but in Israel all the more so. Something has to be done about. We have to do our homework. I think the situation is terrible. There are very few Talmidei Chachamim. There are. I don't know how many real Talmidei Chachamim there are around that we don't give respect for and we don't appreciate just because that we think that we don't really understand them. This is a price we're paying. So I think that something really serious has to be done.
Are there any other arguments that you hear about the army or about people entering or not entering, etc., that you find need to be debunked? Or
look, the worst. When I was in yeshiva, I'm out of yeshiva. It's already more than 41 years since I left Hebron. But when I was in Hebron, the only argument that we had for not going to the army was that we are sitting and learning. And that's what we heard from our rabbis. And I quoted Rabbi Eliashiv, who was not my rabbi, but it was... when they were telling that to you, did they mean learning at an extremely intensive level? Of course. Otherwise, everybody quoted Rav Shach saying that if you're not sitting and learning all the time, you're a roidef. Right. That's what Rav Shach used to say. That's what I heard all the time. I didn't go to Panovich, but that's what was told in my time. Nobody said, I'm sitting and learning to protect my identity. Because I'm afraid that if I'll go to the army, God forbid, I'll not be observant as I was in yeshiva. Yeshiva is not a monastery. I'm sorry for the example. Yeshiva is a place where you get the means to sit and learn. It's the ideal of Torah learning. It's not to be observant. You want to be observant? Go to Hester Yeshiva. This is if you want the environment to protect you. But it was never said. Not in my surrounding. Maybe in Hasidic yeshivas, I have no idea. I'm not. I don't want to put them down. But in Lithuanian yeshivas, it was never said, never mentioned. It was an embarrassment to say. It's like we are not sure of ourselves, that we think we'll go to the army right away, we'll not keep Shabbos. This is not something that came to our mind. And now, most of what I hear is that. I think it's an embarrassment. So if you think that you need an environment that will protect your Talmidim, that will not, God forbid, will go off the derech, so make a unit in the army that will protect you. But that it cannot be an excuse. This is really an embarrassment.
Ultimately, it sounds like what needs to happen is a recalibration and an entire community thinking of itself as part of the greater whole, as opposed to a beleaguered minority. Because to go back to the beginning, at the end of the day,
thank you.
These are questions of communal policy and calculations and risk reward and trade-offs, not of strict halachic syllogisms, so to speak, strict halachic logic. There has to be a big picture consideration, and the community needs to start thinking about these things in that sort of a way.
Correct. Thank you very much. This is really a very good summary of what I said. That's excellent. And I think that we have to start to think. It's as I said, it's not only the army's consideration, but about everything else. We have to think about the whole. This is we are not a small little community that has to protect. We grew up. We are big now, and it really becomes dangerous for the whole state. And to think that our Frumkeit is a threat for the Jewish entity, this is really scary. It shouldn't be that. It's also a very big chilul Hashem. From this perspective, the Zioni community is very correct. There is another critique that I hear. I disagree with it. I don't think that it's completely correct, but they claim, you're all sitting and learning, I want to see some chidushim from your Beis Medrash. Now, there are some great Talmid Chachamim, as I said, they're not always very known, but this is also a very, very strong critique. Again, this is something I quote my father. My father, his father went to Hebron as well. He was in Lomje and he came to Eretz Yisrael, and then he went to Hebron, and then he got married to my grandmother.
Was he there by the massacre?
No, he missed it. He missed his Shabbos. That's why he was saved.
And he was in the yeshiva at the time.
No. He went to Lomje. He studied, I think, 3 years in Lomje. Then he wanted to go to Hebron. He wanted to try. So he went on a Shabbos. There was some vehicle. It was called the Rijans. I don't know what's exactly what. Anyway, and it broke. So he wasn't able to. He missed this Shabbos.
He was on the way.
He was on the way. The outskirts of Jerusalem, it broke, and he wasn't able to make it. And he was saved. So my father told me that they used to call it Yeshuva Chadash and Yeshuva Yeshan. Yeshuva Yeshan is the Yerushalmi, what they call now Chalmos. Yerushalmi yeshivas. Etz Chaim, Chareidim, Meishorim. They're all yeshivas.
Talmidei Agro.
Initially, became the beginning of the 19th century, and this was already
Prussian.
Right. This was already in the 30s, the late 20s of the 20th century. So this was almost 100 years later. Now, people don't know that, but do you know that most of rabbis that were the Rabbanim of Yerushalayim were not from this community? They were always imported from Lithuania. And the question is why? This is much later. This is from Hungary. But that's also a good example. Rabbi Shmuel Salant, Rabbi Shalem Diskin, they were all Litvaks. Rebbe Puzhener, the grandfather of...
Moshe Weinstein?
No, he was an uncle of Moshe, but he was grandfather of Soloveitchik.
Soloveitchik, yeah.
Right. So he I know it because we're family. So he got an invitation. He refused. I don't know exactly the real story, but there were many invitations. They asked the Gedolim from Lita to come to Yerushalayim. And some came. Why didn't they produce their own Gedolim? And the answer, my father said, this was it's a community that never produced anything. If you have the whole community sitting and learning, if there is no involvement with the demands of the world, there is no business, no creativity, it affects the Torah as well. And unfortunately, that's what happens to the Chareidim community in Eretz Yisrael. In America, you have many people that are sitting and learning, but you have also people are involved in business. People go into, they become professionals. They're involved with the world. In Eretz Yisrael, you don't have that. Or you have very few that do that. So it's this monolithic thinking is very bad for our community. It's a critique that really bothers me of the Zionistic yeshivas. They say, where are you? With so many Torah learners, where is the Torah? Yes, there are Avreichim that know the whole Torah kula. It's amazing. There are people that know Shulchan Aruch from beginning to end. They know everything. But you want to see a Moshe Feinstein now. Maybe that's asking too much. But in Lithuania, you have Reb Shimon Shkop. There wasn't that much Torah, but the Talmid Chacham were Goenim. Now the quality of people, genetics didn't stop. We have people that have the potential of becoming Goenim. Where did it go? It's a serious problem. We have to take to give an account for that. So I'm saying the trigger is going to the army, but we have to understand it's not only the army.
Rabbi Yitzchak Lifshitz, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. Thank you.